recorded.
All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another video lesson. This week, we're still talking about podcasting, and we have two guest lecturers. We have Jennifer Tolley and Jackie, instead of Jacqueline, Jackie Hoyt from the Northern Onondaga Public Library system, and they run the podcast Raging Romantics. So we want to get some of their real-world perspective on how podcasting works in libraries. So, very first question, what motivated you to start a podcast for your library? How did you get going?
COVID.
Yeah. All right.
We had a lot of stuff shut down when COVID first came. We were one of the first library systems in our county to shut down. So we were kind of like, well, what do we do? We run a romance book club, and that was cut too. And we were really desperate to talk about romance, I think. And I was really desperate for somebody to listen to me. So I was like, hey, we should sit down and do something that is romance based that people can listen to over and over again because we'll be so brilliant. And eventually the podcast came out of that.
Yes, because originally I was like, oh my God, Jen, we're going to be YouTube stars.
Okay.
No. Jen and I, we knew this, but for some reason we had to reaffirm that we hate being on camera.
Yeah, this sucks right now.
So we recorded the first two episodes, which as we're recording this lecture, actually, it's our 2-year birthday. So happy birthday, Jen.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's been 2 years.
Terrible twos now.
Oh, no, don't say that. We're getting our toddler stage. And we recorded the first two episodes. You know, they went fine. I futzed around with how to make YouTube videos. And then thankfully, Amanda, our communications director at Nopal, and Jen were like, hey, Jackie, what if we did a podcast instead? And I was like, yeah, okay. And we kind of just started running with that. And thankfully, that has been much more enjoyable for us.
Okay.
You did miss out on the footage of me throwing a book, though. So
this is true. Multiple times. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So give and take.
So there was a balance to it, and then you just ultimately landed in podcasting. Did either of you have a background in podcasting before you began?
Nope.
Not a single bit.
I'm a listener. Like I started listening to podcasts during COVID. And I actually only listen to true crime and cult podcasts. So that's been my experience. I started by listening to one of the UK's top podcasters. It's Red Handed, and it's two sassy British ladies. I like to think of them as Jen and mine's British counterparts who talk about blood and mayhem instead of fun times in romance books. Yeah, exactly. So like I had some listening background, but no post-production, script writing, none of that.
Mm-hmm. So I don't even like to listen to podcasts.
She doesn't.
Do you listen?
I listen to ours once in a while when I can stand it.
Okay.
No, I listen to ours all the time, obviously.
You're amazing. To every single episode. I make her. So.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you have to do to teach yourselves to get to this point?
A lot.
Yeah. I mean, we really had to start from the very beginning.
I think we're still learning as we go, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. So our very first one, we recorded in my closet on like these terrible blue snowball. Thank you. They're snowball mics with like my dog trying to eat Jackie. So on like GarageBand, it was kind of a mess at first. And definitely in the very beginning, we had no idea what we were doing. We re-recorded our first episode 3 times. Because it just wasn't working, or we kept messing it up somehow, and we were really unhappy. So I mean, yeah, really from the ground up, from like scripts to content to putting it together, we knew nothing. But we had a lot of time with COVID, so it's kind of great timing to do it.
Are there any specific tools that you would recommend that you use to teach yourselves?
Trial and experience. Like, find what works for you, find what doesn't work for you. Every single podcast I've ever listened to, like even the professional ones, like Red Handed, their first 10 or so episodes sound terrible. They sound like they're underwater. And sound is something that we can talk about when we get to the technology question, because that's obviously, it's a podcast, it's audio format, it's so important. It's going to sound terrible at first. Don't expect to start a podcast and come out of the gate sounding like gold, because it's not. It's not, especially not when you have no idea what technology to use, when you're using blue snowball mics, when you have a dog in your ear the whole entire time begging for another piece of ham. When you're at a library that has a loud HVAC system, you're going to have to find what works for you. And you're going to constantly be finding something that you want to change or that you want to improve on. Like, we're still finding what works best for us. We only just figured out a couple months ago that we should have scripts for our minisodes. Thankfully, Jen was like, hey, Jackie. So
you could try it.
Yeah, don't be afraid to try something. Don't be afraid to say, hey, that wasn't the best, and try something new.
And there is so many podcasters online now that they have really good advice if you look for it. Like, I've read a really great book on podcasting from the McCall brothers. Google, of all places, had these two podcasters put together kind of like an intro to starting a podcast. I found so helpful when we were getting started, just to help us find like a voice and a mission. So, I mean, don't totally go in blind, but yeah, don't be afraid to try things. Look for outside help. Like, there is a lot of it out there.
We did attend a webinar that I think this lecture series is actually still making the rounds, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be at NYLA again this year or something like that. And NYLA is the New York Librarians Association. It's the annual conference for those who don't know. And it was some of the bigger library podcasters, according to them. They're the bigger library podcasters. Who knows? For real. About like what technology they use, what platforms they use, like how they got running. And we did listen to that, and we sat down after we listened to that and figured out like what we wanted to do. I will say the one thing that hasn't changed since we started is our host platform, which is blueberry.com. And that's basically like, it's a server farm where we upload all of our stuff to, and they're our host database. And from there, they distribute for us. That's the one thing that hasn't changed.
That's cool. Okay. So having mentioned Blueberry then, software, equipment, you know, what did you use when you started? What have you now like upgraded to? I mean, you said snowball mics. That's already concerning.
Yeah, it was really, we had one at the time, so we shared it.
Yeah.
Eventually we found the second one.
I will say that, so when you get into podcasting, I can go into my little technology spiel here, if I may, Jen. So we started out with what's called a plug and play mic. And a plug and play, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is basically it's a USB. You plug it into your computer. It's universally recognized software that your computer's like, oh, this is a microphone. So my earbuds right now, they're plug and play. Like, they're automatically working. That's what a snowball mic is. You can buy it at Target. I think it was like $30 or something like that. The problem with that we had was a computer can only recognize one plug and play device at a time. So even though we had the two mics, we could only use one on a computer at a time. So Jen and I came up with this great setup where we both, I will also say the other thing that hasn't changed, we use GarageBand because we're both Mac girls. Love it or hate it, we use Mac. So we record on GarageBand. So Jen would have her Mac prior to its untimely demise with a snowball mic plugged in. I would have my Mac with my snowball mic plugged in. We'd have to sit at opposite ends of the room too to like cut out any echoing going on. And we would be like, okay, Jen, can you do the clap for us? Yeah, that was our signal to start recording, so that I could line up the audios after we recorded, and she would airdrop her. It was a convoluted mess. I'm not gonna lie, but it worked for us for almost a year. So live and learn. For mic setup, that was the mic, the blue snowball mic was what we started with. We tried to experiment when we had to go virtual that winter 2020, 2021, because the other COVID outbreak happened. So, and plus it was snowing, and we did not want to have to drive when we were doing split shifts, opposite ends of the county to record. So we tried Zoom, which Zoom audio quality isn't terrible. Yeah.
Okay.
We're all familiar with how it sounds when you listen back. Like, this lecture isn't going to sound the best. It isn't going to sound as good as it would on like a professional mic, but that's okay. However, the glitches really started to drive me and Jen crazy. So like no, can't deal with it. So then we tried, it's called Zencaster, which is an online recording. it's kind of like a Zoom, but it's meant specifically for podcasting. And we had the same issue with internet connectivity there. So then when we finally were able to get back in person, we carried on with our 2 computers and our 2 snowball mics until we had passed our year birthday, and we were like, okay, we are going to pitch for our dream software, or at least like dream new software.
Okay.
So currently, I should have brought them with me. I'm so sorry. I can send you pictures of everything that I have.
Yeah, please
afterwards. We currently have 2 very nice looking headphones that have professional audio jacks on the end. So if you've been a theater kid, or if you've ever done anything with radio experience, something like that, it's a nice audio jack that they have. We have an audio interface, which basically works as the middleman between my computer, where the recording lives, and the microphones. So it takes mine and Jen's separate audio, condenses it down into one stream, and records it onto the internet or onto the laptop, so that it's easier to edit. Jen doesn't have to do her clap, although sometimes we do it for posterity's sake.
I do miss the clap. The clap was fun.
We do miss the clap, yeah. Sometimes we still clap, just for
just
why
to
not.
Get started.
Yep. And then the best part that we have is we have 2 beautiful XLR mics, which is the opposite end of the spectrum from a plug and play. They are theater quality. They're good quality, and they plug into the audio interface, and we just record from there.
Okay. All right. And so you had to take this to your administration to get approval for that, right?
Yes.
How was that process?
Terrifying.
It worked out though. I mean, because at that point we'd had numbers. So we've been doing it a year. We had all of this evidence that, all right, we started at it was like 20 listens the first month, and we had gone up to like a couple of hundred in a year. So like there was a clear increase. There was a clear demand. People were enjoying it. So we felt like, okay, this is a safe investment for Noble to make. And just going with that information, we're very lucky at Noble that they're very, very interested in trying new things. If you have an idea, if you have like the background and the evidence for it, they let us run with it. So our director was really like, yeah, sure, let's go for it. We'll buy all this stuff. You guys go wild. So it wasn't as scary as we thought, but we did have to wait for like that year mark to feel comfortable to be like, please give us a little money, help us out a bit.
Now, how are you managing those? I'm going off book now. I'm like off of the script questions, but how are you managing those statistics? I mean, is that something that your software is providing for you? Do you have a spreadsheet that you're just updating all the time?
So our host database, which is again Blueberry, they manage all of our statistics for us across all platforms. I can send you a screenshot later just to kind of show you what everything looks like when we look at it online. It breaks down listens for us. We look at the month-long listens and kind of compare month to month just to see how we're trending, see what topics people are interested in. And it also shows us the global distribution, the type of software people are listening on, if they're web, if they're app, if they're doing Apple, Spotify, that sort of stuff. And we can also manage our distribution platform. So if we're going Apple, if we're just going blueberry.com/Nopal, which is our host website, or nopal.org/Raging Romantics, which is our library website. So we can see all those breakdowns, and it actually maintains the entire statistics for our entire longevity. So we have everything going back to the beginning, which is really exciting to see sometimes.
That's really cool.
Librarians love data. So it's awesome just to have all of those numbers and be like, hey, see, this is how great we are.
Yeah. It would be great if other podcasts released their numbers. So, because Jen and I are competitive and we want to know where we rank. Apparently, Raging Romantics back in like April or something was the #1 book podcast in Switzerland. So
Switzerland, okay.
Switzerland.
Oh, maybe they're the country of romance now for Europe.
Chocolate, romance books goes hand in hand. It's all
for me.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. All right. So I know I went off topic with that last question. But I did want to ask about, why did you pick romance as your genre? I mean, you kind of touched on that when we did why did you do a podcast in the first place, but why romance? Why that as opposed to other library themes and topics?
So, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a traditional library podcast. There's people that really love those. But at least for me and Jackie, we're giant romance lovers. We have the romance book club. We've been reading romance longer than we probably should have. It's probably a problem. Between us, we've probably read like 3,000 romances.
At least.
So we were really interested in doing something that was a little bit bigger than like a traditional, oh, hey, this is what the library is doing this week. This is like a local author or whatever. We kind of wanted something that would be a little broader. We wanted something that would interest people who were not already library users. Because one of the problems with the library podcast, maybe not a problem, but a limitation of a library podcast is that it's of interest to a very small service area. We are lucky enough that you can love romance without loving the library, even though you should love the library. We mention that in every single podcast. And it spreads it a lot further than it would otherwise. And romance itself is just a really fun genre. There's so much to dive into and to talk about. It's a very active community of romance lovers. So there's so much to just dive deep, as me and Jackie like to say. We like take a small topic and we really just want to like tunnel in and figure it out and talk about it and think about it and learn about it some more. Especially something like romance, which is still very disrespected. In a lot of cases, we're kind of like, all right, we are two librarians. We are this authoritative source. We want to take it seriously in a fun way.
Yes. Jen and mine's friendship started because she foisted Ruby Dixon off on me, which if you know, you know. Ice Planet Barbarians. And this was like 2016, 2017. Our friendship started because of this. And we've started our romance book club between the covers. Jen's fabulous name decision there.
Obviously between a book cover.
Obviously. Because we wanted to talk with our patrons about romance. And when something that we kept hearing from our romance book club goers was that you guys think way too much about this. You guys go way too deep. And so Jen and I have multiple text chains that are like paragraphs long just talking about these books. So when we shut down for COVID and we had the book club taken away from us forever, however temporarily that was, we still were like, this is our chance. Maybe now we can start talking a little more deeply about this with a wider audience and kind of maybe start connecting more people back to Nopal, because that's something that we've always had to reckon with is how can Nopal, a small community library or smaller suburban community library, in this small area of upstate New York, how can we justify reaching out to people who live in Texas, who live in Switzerland, who live in England or Guatemala? We've connected with people there. Like, why are we doing this instead of just focusing on something that's Nopal based? And my answer is that we are spreading awareness of Nopal, of our mission, of our goals, and of what our library does to more people. And maybe that'll excite them about their own local libraries. And eventually what goes around comes around. It'll come back to Nopal.
That's a good point. Yeah. That, I mean, promote libraries in general, your people will eventually come find you. And it's that passion that probably really fuels your success. I mean, if you weren't this passionate about romance, I can't imagine people would want to listen to you anyway. Like if you didn't care about it and you're very stoic about it, like. So with that in mind, like, you are obviously very passionate about this topic. You're passionate about libraries. You know, how have you used that to find your voice, and how do you present this information in a way that is both, you know, passionate but professional at the same time, engaging without having those visual cues? I mean, there's a lot to think about when it's voice only communication.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's something we're still working on, to be honest. I mean, when we did the podcast, we took it in a way where we would have opinions, where we would have like a very personal individual voice that would still be respectful of the library that's sponsoring us. And it's a tightrope I think we are still figuring out how to walk in some cases, but it's better. It's really like, I don't think we've done anything too crazy. I want to say that, but it's definitely against the grain of what people think of librarians, I think.
Yeah.
So you do a really good job with the making a joke out of it too, with the whole like order for the swears and like that kind of stuff. And, like,
I think that, like Jen said, we're still finding our voice, and that all goes back to we're still figuring out what works for us. We've been around for 2 years, but neither Jen or I had done this before. And I think that something that separates Raging Romantics out from a lot of other podcasts you might listen to is, like Jen said, we're sponsored by the library. So we maintain our library's standards whenever we speak, whenever we sit down to record, whenever we write a script. We have to keep Nopal in mind. And that has definitely been something that has been a learning curve, especially for me, because foul-mouthed farmer over here, so I am the reason that there is a swear jar. But I think that where most podcasts have the ability, maybe not ability, have the I don't know, audacity, shall I say, that they can say really whatever they want, and there's nobody really getting flack back to them. You know, they're getting sponsors, they're getting paid to do this.
Yeah.
We are technically, yes, we're getting paid to do this because we work for the library, but also the library's voice has to be uniquely reflected at the same time as our own. So we're like components in a larger machine, I guess you could say.
We talk about that a lot in class, how when you're creating this digital content, you know, you have the libraries, not only their the reputation and how, you know, people go to the library as a source of, like, they know they're getting the right information, they're not getting fake news from the library.
Right.
You have to convey that with your media as well. So no, you got a really strong point about making sure you connect it back. And
I think too, just being librarians, our research is a lot stronger. So like, you know,
show notes
when
are
we do our script, so maybe our scripts are like 7 pages of what we're actually saying, and then there's another 7 or 8 pages of sources and like information and like
7. Only 7.
Jackie has given me like 20-page documents before for me to go through.
But Jen does hold the record for the longest script. I don't remember which
for probably
episode.
Scandals.
Oh, Scandals, right? Yeah.
Scandals. Well, there was a lot for Scandals.
That was a big month.
There was a lot of gossip to go over with the Scandal episode.
More than 20 pages for a script.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Like I said, it's not necessarily everything that we say out loud, but we do keep a really tight rein on our sources, on what we're saying. I mean, I'm not saying we're never wrong. I'm sure we have been, especially because romance is just such a big pool. And even with the 3,000 romance novels between us, I mean, we've both been reading since like middle school. I'm sure there's stuff we just have blinders about and we've missed. But to our best effort and to our best knowledge, everything we've said is like factual, researched, you know, thoughtful, even if we're trying to guess something or if we're like making like a conclusion of a point.
Yeah, if you go through our show notes, you'll find all of our sources listed. You'll find it's basically a bibliography in our show notes that we list everything, where we got it and all that sort of stuff too. But just to go really back quickly to the voice, something I want to point out is, like you said, Jess, we are a library entity, yes, and you have to have a library voice. But at the same time, I want to caution you to not be so narrow, I guess. Don't think of yourself as only like a library is a library has a library's voice, right? Like, we're library people, we're library students, we're library workers, we're librarians. We know that each library is different, each library worker is different. So Jen and I, we bring to the table our backgrounds, our stories, our passions, and we can reflect that using the library as kind of like a template, I guess you could say. So like a lot of my stuff, I focus on history. My background's in history, and I use a lot of the library's history resources to help talk about that. Jen likes to talk about like kind of these really modern problems. Like, we just got done talking about personal ads and dating, and going forward, we're going to be talking about like modern dating and how that's reflected in romance books. And so we can use our library resources and our library background to kind of go forward and have that little bit of personality, I think, that hopefully separates us from other similar library podcasts.
And well, I think it's too, and break the stereotype. I mean, librarians are not that, like, you know, prim cardigan, hair in a bun, like, voice. You know, we still have personalities, we still have passions, like.
And I think too, it's important to remember that anybody who listens to the podcast, you like choose to listen to the podcast. Like, the librarian we're not sitting you down and forcing you to listen to us. If you don't like us, that's totally fine. You can go find something else. We make it pretty clear in all of our podcasts, you know, it's our opinions. Please don't listen if you're not 18 or older.
Content warnings are provided.
Oh, we have a lot of content warnings, just, you know, to protect everybody. You know, if you like us, you like us. If you don't judge Noble too hard.
That's fair. So
we're just not for you.
Your voice is changing as you go. You're still finding it, and it's probably going to change throughout. What are some other ways that the podcast has changed since day one to now? We went over equipment. but are there other things that you've changed, things that you've grown or maybe cut, added? Like, what's been working?
I learned how to put music into the show intro, which was an exciting day.
That's been really fun. Yeah, just like those little touches like that are really nice. And I think the content we've changed a lot. We've talked a lot about, okay, what do people actually want to listen to aside from just what do we feel like talking about? We are still struggling with things like book reviews, which might sound kind of weird because library podcasts, that should be really like a no-brainer. You should obviously have book reviews. But for whatever reason, it's just trying to figure out the best practice to do them has been a struggle. So that's changed on and off and like how we handle it. If we either do like a whole episode, or are we going to switch it to like, we started these mini-sodes, we call them. So like there's these really short 5 to 20 minute episodes where we do actually do like book summaries and thoughts and recommend things based on subjects. And then we save the longer episodes for a topic like we just had the personal ad episode. And we're about to talk about on like forgotten heroines today. Yes.
We're going to talk about Eleanor Glynn today. Really it's going to be a good one, just to like, you guys should definitely come listen to that one and the personal ad, because those are really good episodes. But yeah, I think we've explored what content works for us. We originally had it broken down as we were going to do monthly themes, and we were going to do one episode was going to be exploring the theme, whatever that might be, and the second episode was going to be a deep dive into a book, 2 books, however many books that reflected that theme. And it worked. We did it for a year, but like Jen said, we really struggled with finding enough themes to talk about, which sounds again weird because there's so many books out there.
Yeah.
But we really struggled with kind of narrowing it down in our brains to, okay, this month we're going to talk about cowboys. This month we're going to talk about pirates. And from there, we also noticed a shift where a lot of people listened in the statistics to our first episode, but they wouldn't listen to the second episode. So we saw that downward shift. So going forward, was it last September, Jen, that we made the switch?
I think so, that we made the switch.
Yeah. We decided to stop doing more of the book reviews and expand out an entire month devoted to just one topic. And then we would do the mini-sodes, like Jen said, so we could talk about the book reviews on top of that, like she just said. And even recently we've switched from that. Going forward, we have decided for now we're going to stop narrowing ourselves to month, and we're going to do, so like I just finished a 3-part series about the forgotten genres or the lost genres of romance. And that was 3 parts. And now we're doing like 1 episode each. We might do another series going forward. So we're just kind of taking it as it comes and letting ourselves devote as much time to a topic as we would like.
Yeah. I think it's important too that we find stuff we're interested in, as opposed to like really forcing us into like, well, I think people might want to listen to this, but I really don't care at all.
I was going to say, it sounds like the changes you're making are also keeping you engaged with the podcast. So it's still exciting for both of you. I did just get a warning that we have like 7 minutes left, and I have 2 questions I really want to make sure we answer. So do you think we can do it with this timeline?
Yes.
Okay. So how has it been balancing the podcast with other library duties now that we're reopened to COVID? I'm sure your jobs are picking up again. How has that work balance been?
Jen.
I mean, it's been okay. Like we do most of our recording after work just because it's quiet and we won't get 5,000 gazillion reference questions from people who are bothering us. We do most of our research and our script writing during downtime at reference. So it's worked out pretty well. Probably the hardest has been the editing part, at least for me. It's just finding time to actually listen to the episodes while I'm on the desk. I'm trying really hard to have a much better work-life balance. So I don't want to do anything that I'm not getting paid for, to be very, very blunt. So that's probably been just the hardest part, is balancing my own time. But I mean, the whole part up to that is easy. It's not too bad.
The post-production after we record gets a little funky sometimes. Mostly Jen and I are able to record Friday, Saturday after work, and then I will edit. I'm on that reference desk for the majority of like my week-long shifts. So I have one day that I'm not. So that's the editing day. After I finish it, I send it off to Jen, and she has a week, 2 weeks that she can listen to it and send me back, hey, this needs to be cut, or hey, this sounded funny.
Yeah. And I have to say, Jackie definitely saved me, because in the summer, I'm an outreach librarian technically, and I do a bookmobile. I don't have time really to write a script. Like, I just don't have time to really sit down and research and like do these long deep dives that I would like to do. So like, that's when Jackie does the long, like, lost genre segments, and she takes 3 in a row. So I think too, it's just balancing our own time. And yeah, if Jackie's crazy busy in December when I have a lot of downtime, then we'll switch it and I'll do like 2 or 3 in a row, which has happened before.
Will be, so
yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's nice to have a partner. Like, I don't know how this would work as a single podcaster. I think it'd be a lot harder. It wouldn't be as interesting. I mean, so it's just like something for you guys to consider if you do a podcast for your library. Find somebody that you have like good banter with, that you work well together. I mean, I think you probably could do a single person podcast depending on the topic. Definitely for a library podcast, it doesn't have to be like, oh, this is the author, the books we bought, you know, like these are the programs. It doesn't have to be that. It can be whatever you're passionate and enthusiastic about. But definitely consider, can I really talk to myself for this period of time forever?
As a person who is solo recording all of her lectures for 15 weeks of classes, you start to feel a little nutty by the end. So yeah.
I'd love to have a co-professor right now.
All right, one last question, 4 minutes. What is the one piece of advice you have for library staff that are looking to start a podcast? Go.
Don't be afraid to get something wrong.
Yeah.
You will. I guarantee that you will get something wrong. I just accidentally deleted our entire intro segment and we had to re-record it. And we're 2 years old. Things are going to happen. Don't be afraid when they do. Don't be afraid to fess up that you made an erroneous mistake. Like, you said something wrong. I've definitely made corrections on the podcast before. Yeah. It's fine. Move forward and you'll learn from it.
And usually mistakes are actually pretty good because a lot of those mistakes we have made, we've made a better product afterwards. Like, we figured out, all right, we screwed up here, or like we've done a much better intro. We've shortened the intro from like 2 minutes to 30 seconds. Like, just some of this time stuff. Like, it gets better with age.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I would say, like, again, going back, like, if you are going to do something like this, make sure that it's something you want to talk about.
Yes.
So,
okay.
So if you're really, really passionate about war history and you want to do a war history library podcast, please go for it.
You'll find.
Or I think like a local history podcast would be amazing. I think if you could do like a true crime podcast in a respectful, ethical way, I think that could be really interesting. Especially, it doesn't even have to be murder true crime. It could be like, just, hey, this like crazy bank robbery happened in the 1920s. Let's talk about it.
I'm still trying to convince Jen to do a true crime podcast with me. It's no go so far. So
we'll see. I don't know. We'll see. But I think, you don't have to do like the super narrow programs. You can if you want to. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I will say the one person I talk to who does things like that, they get about 120 listens a month. Jackie, what do we average?
Right now for August, we are at 240.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is a giant increase when you kind of broaden your interests a little bit. And then that's all money that goes under programming statistics. So.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. For all of my students listening, the next video on Blackboard is going to be an introduction to part 1 of your next project, part 1 of the next project, which is making your own podcast episode. So
I should say, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Our email is ragingromantics@nopl.org. Feel free to shoot any questions, mine and Jen's way, and if we can answer them, we will. If we can't, we'll find somebody else who can.
Absolutely, yes. So I'm going to make sure I put that in Blackboard as well as any of the resources that they've talked about and any of the photos and stuff that you mentioned. Check the resources folder, and we will see you in the next video to talk about your script writing.
All right, do your homework.
Make good choices.